farmers are reducing emissions by the tune of 33 million tons a year. It's like getting millions of cars off the road annually. So farmers are already doing this by using modern technology, growing these high-yielding crops, achieving your desired policy outcome of reducing emissions. And so what are the feds doing? Punishing farmers by continuing to increase these taxes and regulations.
This is the Canadian Taxpayers Federation podcast. We're dedicated to lower taxes, less waste, and accountable government. So Franco, he's our federal director. He's in Ottawa. Robin, you are our prairie director, and you are literally out on the prairie right now. We can see the wheat field behind you. What's going on out there?
It's harvest time, Chris and Franco. It's I'm in Northwest Saskatchewan here on family farm. I just play junior farmhands here, help drive the grain carts and do some chores in the yard. There's a beautiful field of wheat behind me. We were going to take this off today. It's been above 30 for the last couple of weeks here. Got a little shower last night, a little cool this afternoon here. So the folks are out swathing canola, and I'm just doing some chores in the yard right now. But it's knock on wood, it's going really well in Northwest Saskatchewan at this point.
I can't actually do anything that provides merit with my hands. So that's why I'm always here on the microphone talking about the need for lower taxes. But just for anyone who's only listening to the podcast, we actually have Robin in the field. You could probably hear the wind. That's because it's a little windy in Northwest Saskatchewan, I guess. But Robin, let's talk about the price at the grocery store because it's soaring. How is your harvest going and what does it mean for the future of food prices?
Yeah, harvest is going really well. Again, notwithstanding the sort of chilly day today. For those viewing, Franco, you can see it's a little chilly. I'm wearing my bunny hug.
That's a hoodie for normal people.
Yeah.
Bunny hug.
Bunny hug, I think, is the correct term. But very, very local term. So, harvest is going well in Northwest Saskatchewan. This is a wheat field behind me. We've taken off just over 1,000 acres of wheat in the last week or so. It's running about 80 bushels an acre, which is actually a really great yield, great quality wheat, a lot better than when Western Canada had a systemic drought last year. Yields are good, quality's good. That means there's going to be more supply. But at the same time, every Canadian, when they go and get groceries, they see their food bill rising. Food inflation we saw was up 10% in July, the highest in 40 years. So more supply, more crops. This is going to be good news for food prices. That said, Ottawa continues to increase taxes on farmers. They continue to increase the carbon tax on farm inputs, on farm suppliers. They're now talking about forcing farmers to reduce fertilizer emissions, which could result in a reduction in fertilizer use. And this wheat field behind me won't be as thick as that, if that's the case. All of these things, they drive up farmer costs, which are going to increase prices at the grocery store shelves and hurt food security abroad as well. So harvest is going well, but soaring taxes and crippling regulations from Ottawa aren't helping farmers, and they're not helping families buy groceries.
Now, Robin, you mentioned the carbon tax, and if you swing the camera back around, I'm pretty sure that what's laying on the ground there, the big white cylinder, is a propane tank. Can you break that down for us, how the carbon tax affects farmers and what they have to pay for? Yeah, it's right behind you there. It looks like basically a gigantic version of what people would use at barbecuing or camping.
Yeah, exactly. The silver structure there with the auger going into the top, that's a grain dryer, and the white cylinder below is a propane tank. Exactly. So farmers in Western Canada, big growers of grains, pulses, and oilseeds, a lot of farmers have these on farm now. Grain dryers, they use propane or natural gas. So while on-farm fuel use is in fact exempt from the federal carbon tax, propane and natural gas are not. So much so that the Parliamentary Budget Officer has done a report on this, showing that by the year 2030, which isn't that far away, just those carbon taxes alone on propane and natural gas on farm could set farmers back $200 million a year. That's just on heating and drying. As I mentioned, if you're hauling stuff on farm and off farm, fertilizer, grain, all of the suppliers, equipment manufacturers, everything that feed into the agriculture value chain affects farmers. The carbon tax drives up the cost of everything in that regard, and that drives farmer inputs up, farmer costs up, and ultimately hurts the bottom line. But of course, it's going to drive up food prices as well at home and abroad.
All right, let's shift to just one other thing that you kind of mentioned, and forgive my ignorance here as I sit in my downtown office in Ottawa. But, we saw all the protests going on in the Netherlands over what they're doing with fertilizer reductions. We also saw this, the government in Sri Lanka fall on the issue of food prices. Here in Canada, I can tell you right now, the groceries, ground beef, it's going through the roof. And yet the feds are still talking about fertilizer reductions, if I'm not mistaken. Can you really break down what's going on?
Exactly. Yeah. And those are great examples, Franco. The government of Sri Lanka actually banned fertilizer use, trying to force farmers to go back to sort of ancient organic methods. And the food supply dried up and prices spiked and they overthrew the government. Of course, we've seen the protests, as you mentioned, in the Netherlands and across Europe. So the feds here, they just concluded a consultation suggesting that they want to see fertilizer emissions reductions of 30% in the coming years. Now, the reality is that fertilizer manufacturers in Canada, they produce, what we're talking about here is really nitrogen. Nitrogen is a nutrient. It's, 80% of the air we breathe. It's a key nutrient for plants to grow, like this wheat behind me. That's what helps grow those large yields and high protein wheat for all of the food that we eat. So if producers of fertilizer, of nitrogen, are already doing it cleanly and greenly in Canada, they're reducing emissions. They're doing it in incredible world-leading ways. If that turns into hard reductions in actual nitrogen and fertilizer on farm, like that wheat field behind me is not going to look like that. It's going to be thinner. It's going to have less protein. It's just going to be a poorer crop. There's going to be less of it. And because of that, just basic supply and demand, prices will go up. But farmers will be hurt because yields will be way down as their input costs rise. So this consultation just closed at the end of August. Hopefully the feds are trying to find a way to back out of it because, the prime minister is going around the world talking about, the war in Ukraine, global supply chains, how Canada and Canadian farmers will help feed a hungry world, while at the same time talking about reducing fertilizer use at home while driving up these carbon taxes. It's cognitive dissonance. It makes no sense if you're doing anything other than pontificating about legitimately wanting to help farmers by getting out of the way and allowing them to do what they're doing in terms of feeding a hungry world.
It just makes no sense, Robin. How can you talk about feeding a hungry world if you're strangling your own suppliers here at home? It's nonsensical. Now, you talked about higher costs. You talked about carbon taxes, lower yields because of fertilizer reductions. So farmers, it sounds like they're backed into a corner. What options do they have? Like, aren't they already reducing their emissions using modern equipment? I mean, this is not, Little House on the Prairie here. They're really highly technologically advanced on farm, aren't they?
World leading production in Western Canada in terms of how we farm. And we should be celebrating this, championing it, and helping to provide these innovations and technologies around the world to help farmers reduce their emissions globally. The Western Canadian Wheat Growers Association, they actually did a study in Western Canada here showing that just like this wheat crop behind me, those plants are growing, and how farmers are farming in Western Canada, production is a massive net carbon sink. It is a good news story. Farmers are reducing emissions by the tune of 33 million tons a year. It's like getting millions of cars off the road annually. So farmers are already doing this by using modern technology, growing these high-yielding crops, achieving your desired policy outcome of reducing emissions. And so what are the feds doing? Punishing farmers by continuing to increase these taxes and regulations. That's carbon tax, obviously. Plants suck the carbon out of the air and store it in the soil. Pretty basic process. Fertilizer manufacturers as well in Western Canada producing nitrogen are doing it using world-leading technology, clean and green production, and we should be celebrating that as well. It's also perverse in the sense that if you're making those industries not competitive, you're going to drive that production abroad where GHG emissions are going up. So, you're going to reduce food supply while in fact the increasing emissions rather than reducing them. So this is, it's topsy-turvy, right, Chris? Like it's just, it makes no sense. So farming is a good news story. Fertilizer Canada as well. They've got a great program with farmers, ensuring the farmers are using that technology to apply fertilizer at the right time, right place, right rate, right source. That's another exciting innovation we should be sharing with the world rather than hamstringing or even kneecapping farmers here at home.
Well, Robin, we know that you're super busy out there in the field, so we're going to let you go. But thanks so much for coming on to break down this complex issue for our supporters. Now, this is one of the biggest issues in Canada, if not the biggest issue. It could get worse. And that's why we need all of our supporters really to take some action. So here's a few things that you can do at home. Number one, Robin wrote a fantastic national piece for the Financial Post. Go give that a read. We'll include it in the show notes and share with your friends and family. But then even beyond that, go on taxpayer.com, sign the carbon tax petition, share it with your friends and family as well. And hey, while you're at it, sit down on your computer, write your MP an email, or give their office a phone. Anyways, Robin, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks, Franco and Chris. Take care.